Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the D.A.R.E podcast. I'm Miranda Brawn, the host and the founder, and I'm delighted to welcome you back. It's been a while, but here we are. We've got an amazing guest today, and her name is Baroness Martha Lane Fox, CBE. I'm going to read through her quick bio. And when I want to say quick, she is a British trailblazing businesswoman, bit of a tongue twister, and British tech icon, where her focus today is on sustainability, inclusion, and digital technology. She found initial success as co-founder of an online travel site called lastminute.com during the .com boom. And this was in the lead up to the early 2000s, where the company was sold for, and this is why I want to get some clarification. Some report 577 million, some say
Correct.
700. Oh, okay, that was it then. There was $1 billion at one point.
Well, I think that was $1 billion.
Yeah, probably at that point,
yeah.
yes.
And also people are so obsessed with that $1 billion number, this awful idea of like unicorns and therefore you're successful. So I think probably that gets wrapped up in it as well.
And then everyone thinks you're a billionaire, you know, which is really quite interesting. But I loved how you mentioned that it was actually the idea of Brent Hoberman,
yes.
who you clearly know him. I met you and Brent when we were all on the board for the Tessa Jowell Foundation for Brain Cancer. And with Jess Mills, who's the founder and CEO, she's coming on the podcast at some point during season 3 as well. But you shared that it was actually Brent's idea and he brought you in. And I think that's the perfect example of male allyship. I know through lots of career journeys and introduction through myself, it has been a man, it's been a male ally who has said, look, I'm working on X, Y, or Z, why don't you come on board? So I think that was really generous. But you clearly owned your part as the co-founder. I also want to say that you're a board NED, so you're non-executive director for British Airways, Chanel, and Multiverse. You used to be a NED for Marks and Spencer's, Channel 4, and Twitter, which is now called X. Mm-hmm. Would love to know and get the audience, because many of our audience, we've got a mixture. We've got people from the classroom who are at school, university, they're doing their PhDs, all the way up to the boardroom, where we've got CEOs, board directors, and everyone in the middle. So I know there may be some people from our next generation of leaders who follow and watch this who might not be aware of the massive impact that you've had in the like 25 years ago. Oh, it's been massive. You're also a Chancellor of the Open University, a crossbench member of the House of Lords. You're a patron for a few charities. You're a founder of .everyone, which is focused on digital skills. You're the co-founder of Lucky Voice, which was launched the same year that you sold lastminute.com. I've had, when I used to be an investment banker at JP Morgan, we used to go there, take
Happy
our clients.
To hear that. Very good.
Lots of very good evenings.
I've got the photo surveillance camera evidence somewhere.
Oh dear. You were also the UK digital champion to the former UK Prime Minister, and you're a champion of human rights, women's rights, and social justice. I mean, I'm sure I could go on. Have I missed anything?
This is so embarrassing. No, but right now I'm also president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which is a job I've super loved. So I feel I must mention it. Comes to an end at the end of this year, but that's something I've really enjoyed doing.
And that's like, is it 100 businesses?
It's 100,000 businesses.
That's it. Oh my gosh.
Globally, nearly 100,000 businesses. Lots of chambers all over the world and in the UK. So really representing the voice of small and medium-sized businesses generally, but also big businesses and everything in between. So I've loved that opportunity to have a fast track into what the business environment is like in the UK and represent that back into government.
Sounds very good. So what made you decide to launch Last Minute and then Lucky Voices?
Well, lastminute.com was Brent's idea, as you said, and it was the late 90s, although he probably had the idea in the mid-90s, and it came just out of need. Brent is a wonderful person, but a disorganized one. Mm-hmm. Less so now. He's got lots of help and he's very much on the top of his game. But he would always be calling restaurants, trying to find hotels, fun things to do at the last minute. And when the internet arrived, he thought, this is a good idea. I can see how this could be organized better. And so it came out of his brain, but hopefully in talking about it, it became more of an idea when you share it with people and build on it. And together we started writing the business plan in 1997 and then launched the business in 1998. Yeah.
And you were 25 then, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Which is just
a very
amazing.
long time ago, yes. I can just about remember it when I wheel back to the dawn of time.
So have you always wanted to be an entrepreneur? What enticed you to think, yes, I'm going to go and work with Brent. I'm not going to go get a job. And, because you from childhood, you were born and raised in Oxford. You went to Oxford University. So the world was your oyster. You could have chose any path, but you chose the entrepreneur.
Sort of. I lived in London and was sort of part between Oxford and London. My parents were separated and I'd always wanted to do something I guess more unconventional. My parents were academic. My mum was an entrepreneur, and I'd never ever been given any kind of steer that you have to become a banker or an accountant or a lawyer. And so I think they'd have been more surprised if I'd gone to some traditional career route than the ones I chose. And I never had a plan. Still really don't have a plan. I guess I've always responded to good ideas and to great people. Yeah. And I was super lucky that I've had a lot of those in my life.
Yeah. That is a blessing. And what actions or research did you take to launch these new businesses?
Well,
especially your first.
A massive amount. I was 25, as you said. Brent was a little bit older. He loves it when I say that. But we did a massive amount of work. We've been ex-strategy consultants. I've worked in a strategy consulting company for 3 years. And so we did everything. We worked all about the flights industry, all about the hotels industry, all about the burgeoning world of e-commerce, how to build a website, which was really freaking difficult in 1998. None of the tools that were available now. So we did an enormous amount of work for about 6 months, 9 months, building our model, building our business plan, getting the product right, beginning to think about how we could recruit people to try and raise the money. So, it doesn't just happen. You have to really put that grind in. With Lucky Voice, very different business, real world business, bars around the UK, building private room karaoke. Again, we did a lot of work, a lot of research. The guy that I co-founded it with, Nick Thistleton, he was the one that took the lead on a huge amount of that stuff because I managed to have a car accident and end up in hospital. So I wasn't quite the co-founder that I'd hoped I would be. But all businesses are grounded in very, very clear product idea, but backed up with a very, very clear business plan. And if you've got those two things, then you're well on your way. But you need both, in my opinion.
We are going to touch upon your car accident later on, but you clearly chose the good business partner chose you, or you chose a good business partner.
Very lucky.
What advice would you give to someone who is, in their 20s, looking to launch their first business? What advice would you give them in terms of locating a good business partner?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I'm a massive fan of co-founding teams. When they work, they are, I think they can help you get further. Very, very lonely being an entrepreneur, being a CEO full stop, but being an entrepreneur, particularly building something new generally, often in a difficult market, often something that nobody's done before. And you have to marry all these different things together in your head, from the product to the marketing, to the team, to the investors, to all the stuff. So if you can find somebody to share that burden with and somebody that's complementary to your skills, even better. I think the most important thing is that you share energy and values. If one person is like, I'm doing this because it's a bit of a lifestyle business, or I want to have that balance, and the other one is, I want to do this because I work 24/7, I want to build a $10 billion company, that's going to be a mismatch. If you've got somebody that's prepared to, screw people over and just do a deal at any cost, and the other person who wants to build a business that's got sustainability at its core, or, different kind of metrics, then that's also going to be a difficulty. So I think those two things are equally important. Somebody that matches your energy and somebody that matches your values. And then ideally you would like somebody that is complementary to your skills, because one person may love the spreadsheets and one person may love the tech, and that could be really helpful. And if you're both super into the branding, but nobody's interested in the cash flow, then that might not be very smart. But I think being self-aware enough to know what you're heading into, and as I say, I think more importantly than everything, to match values and to match energy. That's where I would start.
I think that's really good advice. And I think that's in any partnership, maybe romantic, friendship, like all sorts. Yes. So you touched upon energy, and that's what the E in the D.A.R.E stands for. And then we've got the R, which is resilience, but also taking risks. What's the biggest risk you would say that you've taken?
Well, I think other people might look at things and say, oh my God, that was a big risk. But they've never felt like that big a risk to me. And I guess that's just, I am super lucky to have that kind of brain, that I often think, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, I'm not in a world where anyone's likely to die. I'm not, a doctor about to operate on somebody that may or may not make it. The risks I take in my life are relatively low compared to risks that many people have to face in their daily life. But I'm also super lucky in that when we started lastminute.com, I had worked hard to own my own flat. I could rent out a room in that flat to give me a small amount of income, so that the risk of not having a job for a period of time, again, felt relatively low. The risk I took with Lucky Voice, it was my own money. It was a risk because it was, reputation. I raised money alongside my own money, and that's always a bit of a risk. But again, it didn't feel like I was taking a risk with my house or my family or my career in any way that was particularly meaningful. So it's important, I think, to put risk in a relative landscape. But having said that, I am also prepared to put myself out there. I do take risks and I apply for things. I applied to be a member of the House of Lords. That was a bit of a risk. That might not have worked. Again, it's not life and death, but it feels as though I hope, low ego enough not to care too much if things blow up massively. And I've had some things in my life that haven't always gone completely well. So I feel like it's a combination of just the way my brain works, and also, I hope, just staying on top of the things that really matter, being a nice person, being kind to your family and your friends. Then risks don't feel quite as substantial as perhaps they can from the outside in.
I think that's a great answer. And it's I love the fact that you applied for the House of Lords, because I think women need to do more of that. You need to put your hand up for those types of positions. Yes. I know in my 20s and 30s, when I was going for roles, I was told that I was punching above my weight, but I eventually did get there. So I think sometimes you need to just do that. Yeah, you need to put your hand up.
I completely agree with you. And I think you're so spot on that I think, unfortunately, women, for a whole bunch of reasons, there's another 15-hour podcast, sometimes don't stand up and say, yes, please. And I think that things don't happen. Generally, you have to make them happen. And it's very often important to tell people that you want something. So I'll give you a very specific example from my life. I really wanted to be on the board of Twitter. Always fascinated by that company. I loved it. I thought it was doing something really interesting. I thought it was a different kind of social network. I mean, whether it turned out like that, I'm not sure. But when I first was interested in it, and the first person from not a VC background was a woman who was important in my life, called Marjorie Scardino, one of the first FTSE 100 CEOs. She ran Pearson. She was brilliant. She was also a bit of a mentor to me. Known her for a long time. And so I reached out to her and I said, I would love to be on that board. She said, a bit like you, maybe not yet, but maybe one day you can get there. But we stayed in touch. I helped her chat through some of the stuff about she was facing in the company. And then at a point in time, it was the right moment and I had more experience and I was more credible. And she helped me. But if I hadn't said that and said to her, I really would love that, then maybe it would never have happened. So I think you can be quite intentional. And, right now I'm coming to the end of my time with the British Chambers of Commerce. I'm saying to people, I've got some time. I want to do something substantial that helps the UK in some way, shape or form. But you have to tell people that, or they might just think you've got a plan, or they might just think you've got no time. Exactly. But, you need to be articulate about the things that you might want in the future.
I think that's key, especially for women who want to get into the boardroom, because that's what I did. Long before I joined the boardroom, I spoke to so many of my friends who were already in the boardroom. I spoke to lots of CEOs, lots of my friends and I said, look, I'm looking for a board role. And when the board positions came, they came knocking and they said, look, would you be interested in X or Y? And that's how I got a lot of my initial corporate board roles. So I think that's a really good suggestion. I also think, I always say your 20s, when I'm mentoring the next generation, I always say to them, your 20s are to really work hard, network, do what you need to do in order to create the foundation for future success. And I think you can always tell the ones who have maybe partied their 20s away versus the ones who have really invested, put their head down. I certainly was one of those ones who put my head down, got all the qualifications, rose up the ranks. You certainly did the same,
but you can party as well.
You can party.
I mean, I think yes. I totally agree with you, and I'm not trying to trivialize it at all, but I do think it's important not to lose perspective in life, right? I would turn up to parties at 1:00 in the morning rather than the allotted 9:00 or whatever, because I'd been working late. But I, also found it very important just for my own
sanity.
Exactly. But also just to give me energy and creativity back in the business, to be able not just to be mono maniacal about this one thing. And I know that that's how some entrepreneurs or some people approach their work. But, for me, having some kind of hinterland, whatever it is, reading a poem, going to a party. When we were at lastminute.com, I was also part of the founding group of trustees of a human rights charity called Reprieve. And we used to have our first board meetings in the broom cupboard of lastminute.com, quite literally like shoved into a small space. And yes, it was completely unrelated to anything I was doing. But just for me, it made me feel as though my whole life wasn't just flight bookings and trying to build an e-commerce company, that I was a bit more rounded person. And I know I did a better job at both things because I had that. So it's quite important, I think, to find out where you get your energy from and double down on those things. I completely agree.
Yeah. And I think for me, during my A-levels, that's when I was doing my party. And then when I didn't do so well at my A-levels, I was like, right, okay. I've now got to make up for it. So I spent my whole 20s but I did go out. And I think you're right. It's important to have that balance. Talking about work-life balance, what is your work-life balance like now?
Well, I'm a very funny working life. Your extremely generous introduction doesn't really show that I don't run anything. I don't have an executive responsibility. Most of the things I'm doing, I'm either in a board role, which of course, when something happens, you have to be super present. Think back to that Twitter experience. It was an absolute, practically an executive role for nearly a year because of what we were dealing with at Twitter. So things can kind of kick off. But generally, I'm a representative for an organization, or I'm doing kind of formal set pieces for organizations or boards. And that's a quite different schedule, So I have much more flexibility. It's also important because I know I'm a disabled person. I need that flexibility. So you might look at my life and say, not much work-life balance because I very rarely am not looking at my email like I'm sure most people are, and I don't totally switch off when I'm on holiday. But I also am able to say, okay, today I'm going to be working at home, or I'm going to start much later today, or I'm going to spend an afternoon doing physio, or whatever it might be. So I do have that flexibility in my life. And for me, that's the real luxury of where I'm at now, is that I can build a life with a bit more flexibility and flex within it, while also, I hope, still working really hard for the things that I've committed to.
I'm on that page. And I think it goes to show all the investments, etc., that you made in the earlier decades, it's paying off now. I'm sure you don't have a mortgage to, you don't have to go and do a day job.
There are still mortgages. There are definitely still mortgages, and I definitely still need all that. But but you can work hard and still set your life up. Because of, as you say, I've been so lucky to have had some of the opportunities I've had earlier in my life.
So tell me, you sold, I read the articles when I was doing my research on you, that I think you made, was it 14 million from the first sale of lastminute.com?
Yeah, 13 million.
13.
Yeah.
So you're in your 20s.
No, I was in my 30s at that point.
Okay, so you're in your 30s. What did it feel like
Well, it felt very momentary, to be honest, because in 2004, I'd left lastminute.com, and then I'd had this really catastrophic car accident, which changed my life forever. 2 years in hospital. So we sold the company as I was sort of either still in hospital or just leaving hospital. And so I was so far away from thinking about the money or how that might be in my life. And of course, it's an enormous amount of money and life-changing in many ways. But I was spending a lot of money caring for myself and worrying about just being able to have nurses at home and the full-time help and support I needed at that point. So it felt like, my God, that was incredibly lucky that I could have these resources to give myself more opportunities than most people who've had this kind of catastrophic accident. So that's why it happened at a very strange moment. I still did obviously get lots of fulfillment, and I feel immensely lucky that that happened in my life. But it was at such a strange moment in time. I wasn't kind of lying there in wads of cash thinking, woohoo, I'm now in some kind of ridiculous penthouse apartment with my champagne bottles. That wasn't my life at all.
And that's a really interesting, for me, your health is your wealth. You can have all the money in the world, but if your health is at risk, that is some serious stuff. And you nearly died in this car accident in Morocco. And this was in 2004.
Yes.
And I heard that you got flown to a hospital in Oxford, then to London. Yes. It took you 2 years to recover.
Well, I was in hospital for 2 years. But
right.
As I'm sure you are aware, you don't recover. I'm not suddenly going to become an able-bodied person. I'm now a disabled person, and I live, with the daily challenges of what that means. Again, not asking for any tiny guitars to come out, but tiny violins, to come out, but tiny guitars, tiny violins. But it's hard. Life changed forever in an instant.
And how did you cope with that? Because clearly your resilience levels are very high, because I see you today and the impact you've made since 2004 to date, and I know you're really humble and you'll be like, oh, it's been a small impact, but it's been a huge impact.
Always, isn't it?
It is always a team effort. We never achieve anything on our own. But what sort of mindset tips would you offer someone who's potentially going through what you're going through? Maybe they're going through a health scenario, or just through life. Life can be tough,
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. And I think sometimes we underestimate that it's still work to get through those things. It's not that you have, or maybe some incredibly lucky people just are and can do it, but I think that that's real. I often say this, resilience and keeping going is a choice. And that choice you can make on a 10-second basis or a minute basis or the next 2 hours basis or the next half a day. But it is a choice, and you just have to keep making it. And it's like any work, you have to do it, and it can be hard. And two things often pop into my mind when I think about the answer to that question. And the first is the first time I stood up again after maybe 9 months of being either in a wheelchair or pinned to the bed with what's called a fixator over my pelvis, which is a metal case to keep your pelvis where it was broken in place. And it was unbelievably tough standing up for that first time, and I didn't think I could do it. And you do it, and it's like 4 seconds, 1 second, and then you try again. And, it's not like you can suddenly walk. That's just standing up, and you build up to be able to stand up for more than a minute. There's no shortcut to that. You just have to do it, and it's horrible. And it's not really because I've got a tough mindset that makes it much easier. It's still a horrible thing to have to go through. So I don't offer up much kind of like sugar-coated beauty about all of this stuff. All I can say is that for me, breaking things down into tiny chunks is what's been super, super important. And the other example I go to in my mind is in 2022, had a bone infection, nearly lost my leg. I had sepsis and I was in hospital again for a very long time. I had very hardcore antibiotics, took a long time to find out which ones were going to work. And I went back to that, just having to break my life down into kind of hourly chunks. Can I do the next hour? Can I get through the next 2 hours? And so I guess I would offer up to anybody who, I'm sorry to hear, might be going through anything, break it down into chunks that you feel are manageable in your head, and you'll get there, and even if that's only the next 10 minutes, do that and then see how you feel about the next 10 minutes. Try not to think too far ahead, because there's just literally no point in doing that. And
I think that's good advice for everything and anything you do.
Yes.
Bite size
whatever
chunks.
You can manage in your mind, yeah.
Yes. But I think it's also about the energy, like just having lots of people that love you and that support you.
No, you're absolutely
that's like
right.
a given, I guess.
No, it's not a given. You're really right to say that, because that's, of course, the other part of it. I'm talking about the internal, but what helps build that internal strength is having people around you. I was incredibly lucky that at the age of 31, when I had my accident, my mother came back to be with me as though I was a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, not a 31-year-old. And she was in hospital a lot. And I had an amazing partner, her husband. He was in hospital a lot. And my extraordinary friend network that just came all the time. There was really not a day that I was by myself over those 2 years. And still now, if I'm in a tough spot, people are there. And so that, as you say, gives you that strength and ability to do all those things. It's not a solo effort. You're absolutely right.
And it is a blessing. And I read famous quotes of yours, and one of them was, my mum and I built a new kind of relationship when I was 31. What was that new kind of relationship? I was like, I'm so intrigued now. What is this?
Well, I think because of, I obviously had this kind of extraordinary experience at thelastminute.com. I mean, very, very different experience for a 25 to, 32-year-old, whatever it was, that I'd had that time. And I've been through so many things, seeing company public, very in the public eye so much. Absolutely, close to my mum, but not kind of living in the way that then we did suddenly do when I was in hospital, where I was literally like a baby at many points. I just needed her to just be there, and could be anything, from holding my hand to just saying I was going to live. And so I think that you do that and you kind of reframe your relationship again. And it's reframed again now, and reframed when I was lucky enough, my children arrived and all that stuff. But I think that that's such a testament to her, that with no complexity, she was just there in a different way for me to how she'd been for the last 15, 20 years, really.
And I think that's such a blessing. And you got two You got twins, haven't you?
I have identical twin sons, yes.
Wow.
Yep, that was a remarkable miracle. I couldn't have children, but they were born by a surrogate. And so to have identical twins was really quite something.
That's great. And they're about 11 now.
They're 9.
9. So the internet's wrong.
9 1/4, but as they now say, we're 10. I'm like, okay, we'll go with 10.
I love that. And just entrepreneurship running your family, because your brother Henry, he's also...
No, he's he's the star of the family, really, but he's just a lot more low-key than me. He works with Brent. And before that, he'd done lots of different businesses of his own, but then he came to join lastminute.com and then did another couple of his own businesses and then went back to work with Brent again. And he runs something called Founders Factory, where they invest in startups, lots and lots of startups, but he's very active in those startups. And I know the entrepreneurs that he works with absolutely love him. Whenever I meet people, they're like, are you related to Henry? So I always feel very, very proud of him. He's brilliant.
I love that. And what funding tips would you give to an entrepreneur who's looking, because we're also going to touch upon the VC space,
yes,
and the lack of funding for women, people of colour, people with disabilities, so on and so on. What funding tips would you give to someone who is starting out?
You have to think of it like a massive sales piece of work, because if I look at people that raise money, you don't call 5 people or send your business plan to 10 people and then you get money. You have to think that this is a real law of kind of hit rates of what's the right expression? So you have to think about the hit rate as very, very, very small. So you have to contact hundreds of people to try and get one meeting, which you might then get some money. It really is a slog. And that's true raising money full stop. And then you amplify that if, unfortunately, you fall into one of the categories where it's no, we know it's harder to raise money. Unfortunately, that is women. Unfortunately, that is people of colour. Unfortunately, people with disabilities. So my first tip is just keep going, because you really, really do have to use all your networks. Get on LinkedIn and find out who's investing in your sector. Network like crazy, whether virtually or in the real world. And if 10 people say no, that is not the end of your business. You have to have 100 no's before you think, well, maybe I have to reconsider something about what I'm presenting. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is get your story super, super clear, because people are, of course, investing in your product, but they're also investing in you as the entrepreneur, because in my experience, very often VCs will think, well, this person is remarkable. I might believe their product, but I actually believe they'll pivot it enough to make it work. So you are also so much part of what you're doing. And I think it's very important to recognize that and make sure that you see that your capacity to sell what you're doing, to sell yourself, to be on top of the detail, to know the answers to all the questions are a big part of the sales pitch.
I think that's really important. And Britain, so moving into the tech, Britain is one of the strongest tech sectors in the world, 1.2 trillion ecosystem, with $7 billion in the VC investment built over the past 2 decades. The global race for skills in AI, quantum, and also cybersecurity is intensifying. And the UK really, we can't afford to slow down the pace. The demand is just too great. But we do have risks of falling behind. So 29% of AI professionals are women. Only 2% of venture capital funding goes to women, and it's a lot less for people of colour, people with disabilities. What top 3 things do you think the UK should be doing, especially with regards to the tech industry, to help promote more diversity within the entrepreneurial space and also within the VC space?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right to talk about the funding, because it does really drive so much through the system. And it is super depressing that 2% of VC funding goes to women-backed businesses. And that's not just in tech, that's across the board. It's a bit more with co-founding teams, so male and female teams. That's like Brent and I, where I think it's about 7 or 8%, I think I'm right in saying. That is partly because only 9% of venture capital partners are women. And you look in that loop, if you think of it, you've got over 90% of male venture capital partners. They're looking at products and services, and do they think, well, regardless of whether it might be a product focused on women being shown by a woman, they might think, well, I'm not quite sure I understand this person, or you invest in things that feel familiar and feel like you. So those networks just get more and more structurally kind of hard-coded, if you like, and it gets super hard to break through. There are initiatives. My friend Debbie Roscoe is doing amazing things with women-backed funds. She's raised a lot of money to try and invest in women, female businesses. The government is right behind that too, and lots of networks trying to help crack this problem. So it's definitely more known, more talked about, more out there than I can remember in my lifetime. But the brutal truth is it's going to take a long time for those numbers to shift substantially. And I think that we need to be focusing a lot more on the regions and getting beyond just the kind of sclerotic hold that London has on all of this stuff. We need to make sure that we're building up examples of women who are doing amazing things, like you, like other women who look different to the traditional way that entrepreneurs look. I mean, I don't know if it's still true, but when you used to type entrepreneur into Google, it would just pop up with a man. I think the same is probably true in chat and other generative AI models. All these things matter. So we have to make sure that at the top of the filter, you know, where there are people wanting to start businesses, that they've got enough examples, that we are encouraging women through the system and in schools, in universities, and in the media to be bold and take ideas and to take the things that I'm sure that they want to try and solve and do those businesses. But we also need to make sure that through the whole chain, the whole funding piece as well, we help women. It's such a huge opportunity. It just is massive because, of course, if you have a more broad diversity of founders, you're going to have a better spectrum of products being created, and that will benefit everybody.
Definitely. I think this is so important in terms of what are the products and services that are being built over the next 5 to 10 plus years. Right. Touched upon AI and technology, and where do you think we're going to be in 5 to 10 years with AI? And for me, I did exactly the same thing. I was playing around with AI. I think that's really important that you do that. And I can't remember what it was, but it came up with a photo of me with someone of my background, which was a white male, first of all. Then it was a white female. Then it came up with an Oriental lady. And I was like, at what point are we going to get to a mixed race, female? And so that was rather interesting. So I think with AI, there is the bias. It's the data that is being fed into it, but there's also privacy risks. There's so many things. But where do you think we're going with AI in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a big question.
I know.
Right? There's just whatever you think about this massive bubble in valuations of AI companies and the amount of noise and hype, there is just no doubt that is a structural shift in how businesses and therefore economies are going to work, because the capacity to do different things or do things better or be more productive, and that can be as true. Obviously, we're looking at huge advances in medical diagnosis and research through to, people setting up companies with half the number of employees. Pretty much every single business I'm involved in is thinking we don't need to increase our number of people. They're not necessarily thinking we're going to get rid of a bunch of people. They're thinking we're not going to have a massive change in headcount over the next 5 to 10 years because of AI-based improvements in our business. And that is quite an interesting phenomenon if you amplify that across the whole economy. Not maybe the big businesses I'm involved in, but there's certainly the startup scale-ups. So absolutely no question in my mind that this is a huge shift and that everybody should be paying attention to it. And I think we've probably overestimated its impact in the next year and a half and completely underestimated impact in the next 10 years. I would be advising any young person to just get as curious as you can about it and to think hard about understanding the products and tools and services, what it means from every angle, whether you're interested in policy stuff or whether you're interested in product stuff. Just think about it. Because, of course, there are going to be jobs in the future, but they're going to look very different. And I think an understanding of AI is just going to be the benchmark. Work with one company at the minute that isn't hiring anybody that isn't AI ready, as they call it, or at least thinking about AI. And that's just going to be the direction of travel. So I think it's enormously important. I think we should all keep educated, keep curious, keep learning. And I think anybody that says this is what's going to happen is talking total crap, frankly, because we have no idea. It's shifting and changing so fast. I've got enough friends in Silicon Valley doing this stuff that I talk to sometimes who are just like, well, we don't know. It's moving so fast. And if the people really at the frontier of that are thinking like this, then we can't be too prescriptive about it. So I really do think about keeping curious, keeping open-minded and trying to stay in some way on top of the things that interest you around AI is really the vital thing, the vital skill.
7 years ago, I was in Paris on a panel talking about diversity in AI. And it just seems like within the last year, it's just overnight, it just has really scaled up. So one of the things we are doing, it's the 10th anniversary for the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation. Thank you. I know you can't make it, but hopefully we'll get you engaged further down the line. And we are launching the Brawn Review, which is on boardroom sustainability, inclusion and corporate governance. What do you think the boardroom and organisation should be doing to become more inclusive and more sustainable?
I mean, I think boardrooms have done a lot in the last 20 years. I really do. And it's easy to be down on all this stuff and look at some of the numbers from certain angles and be, oh my God, we're not making any progress. And when I think about the tech sector, it's so monumentally depressing to me that we're just not making any headway with diversity at all. And when you look at the macro numbers, they're kind of stalling across every single axis, and that's depressing. But, there have been shifts. You think about what happened with the 30% club that got 30% gender representation on boards. That has been successful. Now we just have to work on the executive level, just not the non-executive level. The danger, obviously, is that right now the kind of geopolitical headwinds in all of this stuff are not favourable, and there is a lot more noise about how helpful it can be for companies not to be constricted by all of this diversity stuff. And in my opinion, completely the opposite is true. And if you are committed to diversity and sustainability, you're much more likely to have a long-term future. So I think it's super important to keep making the arguments, particularly here in the UK, where we have a more moderate corporate landscape, I would argue, versus the US. So we should never take our foot off the accelerator. But I do think it's worth remembering that certainly when I started out in my career, there were 3 or 4 examples of even non-execs that were women. Now there are plenty more. We just need to keep the focus on the executive level. I think it's really it's from so many angles that these problems get addressed. I think headhunters are very important in the mix, making sure that they are being as broad-ranging in their recruitment as they can be. I think role models are incredibly important. And I think, CEOs, and as you said at the beginning, male allies, talking about the importance of having that diversity at all levels of organizations. All these things matter. It's not one thing. We just can't take our eye off the ball.
Yeah. So by the time this episode goes live, we would have launched the report. And one of the key recommendations is having a menopause board champion in the boardroom. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about this. Again, to reveal too much information about myself, with the accident I went through menopause at 33, 34, had hysterectomy. So I've been on HT for decades, and I guess the physical challenges that I went through were so monumental compared to the physical menopausal ones I had, that I'm probably sometimes quite like, well, just get on with it. Because when you walk with 2 sticks, you're relatively incontinent, you have a lot of pain, and you're in hospital a lot, they don't seem so important. So I preface my comments with all of that, because I'm probably a harsh person when it comes to physical stuff. And I do appreciate that for many women, it can be super tough. And particularly, I would imagine, if you're doing a certain type of work. If you're working as a nurse in a hospital and you suddenly have a hot flight and you're meant to be dealing with a patient, I can imagine that's super difficult. I think my anxiety around some of this stuff is I don't want a female agenda just to be hijacked with putting women in a category of having a lot of physical stuff we have to deal with that make us less competent. So I think it's really important to have the conversation, but I just hope that we have it in a way that doesn't make male allies and colleagues feel that women are somehow second-class citizens because they're dealing with more physical stuff than men have to deal with, because women are still phenomenally competent and, of course, may need some particular flexibility around certain aspects of work. But I do sometimes feel anxious that the debate gets hijacked by things that I'm not sure are helpful in the long-term way that women position themselves in the workforce.
And what does success look like for you today in 2025?
For me personally?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
You've achieved so much.
No, I genuinely don't feel that. I know I can point to some things that I feel proud of. I am immensely lucky that I had that lastminute.com journey early in my career, but I don't feel that was just me. Yes, I had a big role in the neon pink nature of the branding, but, it was such a big team effort. I feel immensely proud of gov.uk and what we created when I did work inside government. But again, it's never one person. Similarly with stuff I've done with the British Chambers, it's an immense privilege to help them in any way because it's an enormously strong network. For me, this is how I look at my world. I think, okay, in 10 years' time, when I look back, will I be able to answer these questions well. And the first one is, have I had a positive impact in the world? Is this something where I feel as though the company, the organization, something I'm giving my time to is doing something that's meaningful beyond just making money? That's really important just for me. Secondly, I feel like, will I be helping open the door to diversity? You know, by being in this organization, will I be able to help other people that don't look like me or other people that do look like me get in the boardroom or get in the exec room or be raised up in some way? And will I learn from people who don't look like me? That's also incredibly important. And then the final thing is, am I doing something that is keeping me connected to the modern world? And that's not just about technology, but I don't want to be talking about how it was in 1998. Like, I know everything. That's, not, I hope, my style. It's important to stay humble, to stay learning, to think that actually pretty much I know nothing. And as I get older, I realize how little I know, not how much I know. So those are the 3 questions I ask myself. And I think if I can answer them well, then I've done things that I will be proud of.
Very good. And we're coming to the end. Before we do our quick questions, what do you think it takes to find your voice when you're outnumbered as the only female, young, with a disability? Because there are so many people who will be listening to this podcast. They'll be watching us, and they, I'm sure, will want some advice in terms of how you have found your voice in very senior rooms, from the House of Lords to the boardrooms to starting your own business. How have you found your advice and what your voice, and what advice would you give to others?
It may sound funny, but I look back now on moments in my life where I think, whoa, you twerp. Why weren't you feeling more confident? The first Twitter board meeting that I went over to, and I was at that point the only European on the board, and I was absolutely not from that Silicon Valley group, and I was totally intimidated, and I hardly spoke. And I got back on the plane to come back to London. I thought, oh, what were you doing? You had this opportunity and you didn't use it. And I thought, never, ever do that again. Just speak. So sometimes it is as simple as just using your voice to get the confidence to have it. And if I can feel like that with all of the incredible experience and privilege that I have had, then I really understand why it can feel hard to do it. But my first piece of advice is never, ever think because you're in a room, you shouldn't be there. If you're in the room, you're there. So be in the room and don't waste that opportunity. I have wasted it and I look back with regret. I don't have regrets, but I wish I had used it more with confidence. So that's my first piece of advice. And my second piece of advice is, you do need to build up credibility and allies in any room, wherever you are. And so I have often said to people when I've joined a new thing, would you like to have a cup of tea or coffee outside the boardroom? Get to know people. That just helps make the environment feel a bit less intimidating. And, that can be as true in the boardroom of a scary seeming company as it can be in a small charity, just to help make you feel as though the environment is one you should be in. So if you're there, you're there. Use your voice. Never, ever think you can't. And secondly, be smart about building those relationships to make that place feel a bit less scary than it perhaps might in your head.
I think that's so important. And that's what I certainly do in terms of building relationships outside of the boardroom. Yeah. It makes you a more effective board leader. Now, we're going to quickly go through, we're running out of time, quickly go through some quick questions. What is keeping you up at night?
Well, often pain.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Night owl or early bird?
Early bird, definitely. I do my best work before 8 a.m.
Heels, 8 a.m. That's very good.
No, I'm
and
very
what time do you wake
person.
up?
I get up about 5, yep.
Very good, very good.
But I'm asleep by 6 p.m. just to be clear.
You're asleep by 6?
No, I'm not. But it's not like
early.
It's not like some crazy person getting up super early. I go to bed super early too.
Yeah, good. Heels, flats or trainers?
Oh no, well my heels life have been over since the accident. I haven't put on a pair of heels. I can't walk with heels, so I just keep my high heel shoes like a kind of museum above in my bookshelves. So
that's what I do.
Definitely trainers.
Perfect. Favourite song?
Well, I'm Still Standing is my song at Lucky Voice for obvious reasons. Yes. Partly because you can shout it. It's not very hard to sing. And partly because I am still standing.
Very good. Favourite film?
Well, I am a massive 1950s MGM musicals buff. So Easter Parade is my favourite film with Cerise dancing and Fred Astaire and Judy Garland singing.
Great. The book that has changed your life?
War and Peace. I know this is a very big classical book, but I've read that book 5 times at different moments in my life, and I really defy anybody not to find something profound and meaningful in that incredible book.
And finally, what would you tell your 21-year-old self?
I would say get an effing blow dry, because there are so many moments in my life when I've been photographed and I wasn't expecting to be. I know this is very vain, but I came around the corner when we were taking the lastminute.com company public. I came around the corner to the office. It was 6 a.m. in the morning. We'd been up till about 4 a.m. with the bankers. And I walked around to the office and there was a bank of cameras, and I'd never been so photographed in my entire life. And honestly, I look back at those photos and I look like a scared rabbit with frizzy hairs. I was like, get a freaking blow dry.
Do you know, hilarious. Very quickly on the Twitter, you clearly met Elon Musk. And was that the reason why you left when he bought Twitter?
He disbanded the board when he bought it. That was a very intense period of work. I think I had a whole career of 50 years in about the space of a year and a half. I had multiple interactions with Elon. I think he has gone from impressive entrepreneur to maniac to really quite a dangerous individual because of his own personal, just clearly inability to recognise that he's got quite a lot of challenges. I would just leave it at that.
I think that's very wise. And we always end with the very final question. What do you dare our audience to do?
Something that puts you out of your comfort zone, that is something you may have thought was not in your reach, but probably is if you just push yourself to do it. I'm sure that's something that previous guests have said, but I really, I've very often pushed out of my comfort zone in my life, and think basically when you become a disabled person, that's how you live anyway, because walking is quite scary because I might fall over, or, having going on a plane or whatever it might be. So it's always worth it. I think it's very rare that you'll look back and say, oh, damn it, why did I push myself to do that?
Very good, very good. We could keep talking, but time has run out.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I have loved it. Thank you so much for joining us on the D.A.R.E podcast and being our first guest for season 3.
Yeah, season 3, my favourite season. Always the best one. Things get better and better. Season 3, they kick in their stride.
100%. We're here in our lovely new studio. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the D.A.R.E podcast. I'm Miranda Brawn, and you've just been listening to Baroness Martha Lane Fox. Make sure to subscribe, follow, share, comment, and also you can listen to this podcast episode on all your usual podcast episodes, including YouTube. If you would like to sponsor an episode or donate to the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation, you can email us at the darepodcast@gmail.com, or you can check out the website www.tmbdlf.com. Until the next time, take very good care. Thank you. Tune in every month and then hit the repeat button to become the best version of yourself.